As you all know, there are two very popular Sonic.EXE games on Roblox. These being Sonic.EXE Disaster Reborn and Outcome Memories. In this video, we'll be comparing the two to see which one is a better game, since they're basically the same gameplay loop. But before we begin, I want to say to make sure and like and subscribe, and let's start off with our first point where we'll be comparing. First thing we'll be looking at is graphics. Now, if you're like me, I like both the Outcome Memory and TD art styles, but honestly, Outcome Memory's graphics are insane. If you look at any gameplay of the game, if you have a high enough resolution screen, you can see so much lighting, and all the models are really well designed. And each map is very different from the last, all having their own special gimmicks and things to make them really cool. While on the other hand, TD takes a more Roblox approach. The characters all have their same custom models and stuff, but the maps look more rudimentary in my opinion. Now, this is not saying that they're bad in any means, because they're all great, but we're looking at it from a design standpoint, Outcome Memory solos. Honestly, it's better than around 95% of the stuff that comes out today. But remember, these two games were made at different points. TD did originally release in 2020, when the art style like that was a lot different and worked a lot better for what they had planned. While Outcome Memory takes more of a realistic approach, showing how the characters would actually look like inside the game. But speaking of the game, it's kind of important to know how they work. So it's very important for a game to actually have a really good gameplay loop, which they both do. TD and Outcome Memory have the same thing. 7 survivors go against 1 executioner, and basically you have to survive the time limit and escape at the end. Now, both of these games do it in the same way, where once you reach the end of the time limit, you have to escape in either a ring or a certain exit. These change around every single match, so it's not always in the same spot, but you can probably guess where it is. And inside of a game like Outcome Memories, some of our maps actually have multiple exits at the same time, like You Can't Run. But one of the biggest differences in my opinion about the gameplay loops is how they work when you're playing with others. So how it would work inside the original TD is you and your 6 teammates would have really long cooldowns, and your abilities wouldn't really do that much to the executioner. This was meant so you had to really work together and strategize beforehand in order to actually beat the EXE, since the game was pretty killer-sided in my opinion. Especially with the time length being around 8 to 9 minutes per match with a full lobby, you had to play really well or your team and you are really done for. Especially the fact that you could get minions after you get down twice, that can make the game really hard. While inside of Outcome Memories, it is important that you help out your team, since you have support characters like Tails or Cream. Most characters on their own can just stun the EXE or just loop them around by themselves. Theoretically, you could just have one player loop the killer for the entire match while the rest of them sit around doing nothing. Especially the fact that all the characters have their own special passives, it makes it a lot easier for them to do this. And for this point, I do have to give it to TD. Since TD, you have to work well with each other, and there's many different combos and stuff you can do to get the executioner away from you. My favorite is using Metal Sonic to grab the executioner, then using a character like Blaze or Shadow to stun them multiple times before pushing them away with Fire Blast, for example. You had to work on specific strategies to help out your team and use the map to its full effectiveness so that you can win. That being said, both of our gameplay styles are not flawed, since even though you could potentially be soloing inside of Outcome Memories, you still have to work a lot together or else you can easily get caught off guard, since there's going to be many stealth killers in the future. But as right now inside of the state of the game, I would say the game is very survivor-sided compared to TD, where the game was pretty killer-sided. Ah yes, we all love the Colossus doing 65 damage a hit. And the Cream only doing overheal. Those were the times. But speaking of abilities, we will actually be going on to that, since honestly, this is pretty tied between the two games. As of right now inside Outcome Memories, each character only has 2 abilities, excluding Amy. But inside version 0.3, each character will actually be getting their 3rd ability. We've actually already seen this with Metal Sonic with his grapple ability, where unlike TD where if you grapple via EXE, it launches him away, he uses it more as a mobility item, where he's able to get the higher ground or launch himself to safety. Now what makes Outcome Memories very different from TD for that aspect is that almost every single survivor has their own special passive. For example, if the executioner gets too close to Tails, even if he's invisible, Tails can see an outline of him, or the fact that Knuckles and Cream can glide. This makes each character uniquely their own and works out in certain maps, while other maps may not be the best. While inside TD, you can keep stunning the killer, and many survivors can really pair their abilities well with others. For example, you can attack with Shadow, grab him with Metal, and then use Blaze abilities or any other character. And also inside of the game, the supports weren't completely useless. For example, Eggman didn't have a way to necessarily stun the EXEs, but he could make them 2 times slower, launch himself out of danger, and slow the EXE a lot with a long range attack. They might have not necessarily had their own special gimmicks, but they played really well to the fact where if you defended your support, then they can support you very well, just like how Silver can give you guys speed buffs. But inside of Outcome Memories, you only have 1 killer right now compared to TD, which had 3. So once we get to 0.2, there might be a difference, but honestly, they're both play around the same style. They all have their own special types of indicators. For example, inside TD, Colossus should have a button called Indicator, while inside of Outcome Memories, you have to either use God's Trickery or your invisibility and get close enough to survivors to see them as 2011X. But with that regard, like I said, I'm going to give a point to both of them, because really, each one is depending on how you want to play and depending on your type of style of game. But one thing that can change up the game is the map. Inside of TD, there were 6 maps compared to next update inside of Outcome Memory also having 6 maps. Inside of TD, the maps are really big, but the fact that if the killer messed up and you're able to stun them off the edge, it can make them lose a lot of time if there's no ladders nearby. This normally causes for certain areas of map to be very well defended, since you're easily able to keep stunning the killer, or have certain areas where you're able to block off, kind of like Silver on bridges. They also had a lot of detail inside of the maps, which show a lot of work was put into them. Now, inside of Outcome Memories, the 4 maps we currently have right now, being You Can't Run, Hill Gym, Hill, and Not Perfect, are really well completed. They all have their own special lightings, while many maps are smaller and bigger depending on what size they are. For example, Not Perfect and Hill are very small maps, so the killer can easily catch up to you, while maps like You Can't Run are medium, and Hill Gym you are never finding anybody. That is my one and only complaint about Outcome Memories is how absolutely huge Hill Gym is. It is so hard to find people. But for that, I'm going to give a point to Outcome Memories for a fact of how much detail is put into their maps, but I'm not saying that they are better in physical design. Many of the tiny maps like Not Perfect and Hill are small, which makes it really difficult for the survivor. They also don't give you many room to work with, so you can't actually do neat combos and stuff. For example, on Hide and Seek Act 1 inside of TD, you could basically go up to the certain high area. I'll put up a clip right now. And if you stay up with your team, it could be good since you have many different escape routes and you can push the killer off the side. But the issue was there was a ladder and you were at a corner of a map. When the maps get tinier or more enclosed, you have less area to counter, and honestly, it gets really hard to play. But one thing you can never knock inside of both games is the music. The music inside of both games are absolutely amazing. But for a music part, I do have to give it to TD. Outcome Memories music, especially for the Last Man Standing, since TD doesn't have that, are absolutely perfectly made. They all have their own emotion. The maps, while during the last 80 seconds, are really good. You can have hypercore, some of them are slower. It's really good. But inside of TD, I find them better because it's a lot more atmospheric. For example, inside of Hide and Seek Act 1, if you're listening to the background music, it's just wind blowing with like a flute. This might not sound that interesting, but it is for the fact that the entire map is on fire, and it really feels like nothing should be there. It's kind of like the fact that you're just in the emptiness, slowly wandering, waiting for the EXE trying to catch you. Or you had Hide and Seek Act 2, which is inside of a cave, where basically all you heard really was just water dripping and just some sound effects randomly played. It was basically like you were inside of an analog horror area. Although the Outcome Memory music is better, I like a lot more for the fact that it's atmospheric inside of TD. These make the maps a lot more enjoyable in my opinion, and a lot more fun to play against, because you could just see a whole army of EXEs coming towards you, and all you hear is just silence, which is pretty creepy. But I can't see what Outcome Memory plans to bring inside version 0.2 for the maps, so we do know they're doing Hide and Seek Act 1 and 2, and maybe Kind and Fair, so we'll have to wait to see for that. Now, the next part we're going on to is how much gameplay and content there actually is. What I mean by this is kind of like an overhaul of the view, since if a game only has a few characters and like a single map, it's a lot less enjoyable than a game that's less polished but has a lot more content to play. So for this, I'm going to have to give it to Outcome Memories. Right now inside of the game, there aren't much, and as you know, there's not even a TD game as of now. But for fact stating that they're going to have 20 executioners inside of the game, even more because there's some that haven't been revealed yet, and over 24 survivors really says a lot. Especially with the fact that each EXE and survivor have their own themes, their own customizations, emotes, and everything else. That is so much. Even if you only want to play one match of every character, that's over 48 matches. And as the game develops, who knows? Like I said, there could be even more. And there's just so much that can be coming to this game and will come, that it just clearly will have more content. So in my opinion, it is better. But TD still has its charm of its smaller cast, and the fact that we were actually going to add Charmby, Vector, and Espio before, the game got taken down. It still had a very fleshed out cast, but one of the weirdest things I always found for me is the fact how the maps were randomized. If you don't know what I mean, every time a map shows up, the next one is randomized between the rest of them. So I had an interesting curse of that, with the fact that I got not perfect 2 days in a row, 8 times. That soundtrack easily became my favorite for a fact that I had to listen to it for 2 hours straight basically every day. But I'm also not knocking the game for having no cosmetics, because even though they were technically going to add it, I like the charm of there just being no cosmetics or not really any at all. This made TD feel a lot better of a game and smoother in my opinion, just for a fact that you just play matches. But with that, we are on to the final part of this video, which is better? Between TD and Outcome Memories, it's honestly to your own opinion, which, comment down below, just saying. But I gotta say, it's Outcome Memories for certain reasons and TD for others. Coming with a view of Outcome Memories, it could be a better game for a fact of its quality, the amount of content, the amount of fan outreach, and the fact that, hasn't been taken down yet. And for those reasons, Outcome Memory is definitely a better game for that. Just so much detail was made into the game, including the fact that each map has Easter eggs and stuff. But when it comes to a more playable game, since it does take a really good device to run Outcome Memories, TD is definitely the winner in that part, including the fact of the gameplay loop and overall design. Now you might think I'm just saying this because it was original, and maybe I am. But on Roblox, there are very little 1v all survival games that actually require teamwork. And even though some matches could be hard inside of TD or infuriating, it really was a good game. But with that, Outcome Memories is a better game for design, upcoming features, and overall quality, while TD is a winner for people who don't have the best devices, want a fun time, teamwork, and a good gameplay loop. But I want to say make sure to like and subscribe one more time before the video ends. We're almost at 6,500 subscribers, which is crazy. But anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. Comment down your opinions below, because might be different from mine. And I'll see you all next time. Later.